All right, welcome everyone to another Data Resilience SpectrumCast. Thanks to everyone who's out there watching, and want to welcome our team here. We have Randy Arsenault, my co-host. Hey, Randy.
Howdy.
And Trisha Jang and Sean Sperry, our illustrious subject matter experts in the data resilience space. How's you doing today, guys?
Doing well. Hello, Steve.
Hey, guys. So we are at a culmination here. We are at step 6 of our 6-step program. This is the automation and orchestration component of ensuring that you can build out a truly data resilience program. So just real quick as a highlight, the administrative security component was number 1. Number 2 was really all around the ability to identify and monitor things going on in your environment. Number 3, we talked about pervasive encryption. Number 4 was the multiple recovery areas. Number 5 was we covered last week around air gapping. And today, number 6, around automation and orchestration. And a lot of people may say, what am I going to automate and orchestrate in my backups? And I would say that you want to be able to automate that recovery process as fast as possible, because when an event happens, depending on what the event is, it could be fairly catastrophic. You're pulling your hair out. What's going to happen? If you can just hit a button and make sure that all that panic and human error or whatever doesn't get injected into the recovery process, it can really help you. Sean and Trisha, what do you say? You agree, disagree?
So I totally agree, but one of the great things about Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus is that we automate so many pieces of the data protection and recovery process. I mean, whether it's the blueprints, which have the automated scripts to help install your Spectrum Protect server, whether it's our automated schedules to do your backup, or the restore piece that you're referring to.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. You know, automation is important. And I think we were kind of talking a bit before we started here. And I just worry that some people, this word automation encompasses so many different things. And there's so many people out there selling and touting various different tools that are going to, quote, solve the automation problem, right? And I think one of the things that you always preach, Steve, is important, and that's data classification and deciding where you're going to apply this automation to achieve the most bang for the buck, right? It's your most important data and where you're putting the most effort into manual type of operations, and also what's most critical to the business, right?
Well, and I think one area that comes with this automation is, even though we're automating things, we also have to monitor and have the ability that when an issue occurs, that it's surfaced, because otherwise it's like monitoring your bills and having them paid, and then suddenly you're like, why is my electricity off? And you didn't realize that your credit card had changed or something. So there's got to be that monitoring step that makes sure that what's being automated is actually occurring.
It strikes me that even on a more kind of rudimentary level, as organizations grow and as their data volumes grow and the number of workloads they're supporting grows, it seems to me as if, you know, automation and orchestration become just necessary in order to scale, right? I mean, you can't really manage or maintain a proper policy base or level of service manually. It's just not practical, right? So you've got to develop ways to make your processes more repeatable. As Steve said, it makes them, you know, less error prone, you know, less prone to human error. So that repeatability, that reduction of, you know, vulnerability to errors and missteps seems like a pretty basic thing to do. Now, of course, you know, as Sean often talks about, it all comes at a cost, of course. It's not free. So there's tooling and there's infrastructure necessary to do it. But it seems like hitting that balancing point at which orchestration and automation become not only desirable, but kind of necessary to sustain your environment. It seems like you're going to hit that pretty early on, I would imagine.
I would agree with you, Randy. And I like how you tied it to what Sean said, because Sean is always talking about the budgets that come around data protection, right, and data resilience. First of all, I think we're in kind of phase 1. Maybe I'm wrong, right? I think we're in kind of this phase 1 of kind of the automation piece of the protection environment, which means, you know, typically new technology, kind of expensive, et cetera. And then also, is it really robust enough, right? I mean, do we know what it's supposed to do? And quite frankly, because it's new, is it being done the right way? And I think the nice thing about at least automation type tools is they kind of can put things in a process for you. And as you go through that process and you run that automation tool, if something doesn't go right, then you have the ability to kind of go back in and kind of tweak the automation pieces and get it to the way that's right for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's self-documenting.
Right.
Yeah, and one of the things I really love about Spectrum Protect, and is my tooltip for one of my tooltips for the day, is that everything in Spectrum Protect has a command line associated which you can script in, and that gives you that customization as well as the automation, because not everything is exactly the same when you're backing it up. So to your point, Steve, being able to get it automated, but being specific to your workload, to your backup need.
The other piece that I really like about automation, and we talk a lot about this here, and in fact, I was listening to a really interesting security summit the other day, and the federal government, they had a gentleman on from the federal government talking about, the things that they have to be accountable for when doing recovery, and that the only way they know they're any good at it is practice. And we preach that all the time. And when you can automate something, now you're not talking about bringing people in, only twice a year to kind of do a test, right? You can set these tools up, these scripting. I know you can do this in Plus as well. Sean, Trisha, any additional information would be great. Set up, say Friday, I want to come in. I want to load up the Exchange environment. And does it work, right? I can do that in an isolated spot and test it. No one has to be there. We don't have to do anything. You just might come in. You might have a subject matter expert kind of look at, okay, did it come up right? Can I get to my mail, et cetera, my calendar, right? But the more you do that, the more when the event does happen, you feel pretty confident, right? Within 2, 4, 6, whatever hours, depending on how big your environment is, you can handle this, right?
Yeah, and that really pulls in one of our business partners, Christy, which is my second tooltip for the day.
Oh, it's a twofer.
They really take that whole automation to the next step, because I know we talk a lot about virtual machines and containerized machines, but there's still a lot of physical servers out there. And if there is that complete failure, you're talking about rebuilding that whole server. And that's where that automation built in with Christy Bear Machine Recovery is going to make that job repeatable, easy. You don't have to have the experts in there, and it's integrated directly with the Spectrum Protect piece. So that's what automation should be about.
I think the unfortunate truth is these environments are complex, right? And it's true whether it's on premises. I think one of the things, actually, I was talking with my friend of mine a couple of days ago was about the cloud, and how kind of when we started with the cloud, however many years ago, it was in my mind or sold as, oh, this is easy, right? They're going to do everything for you, right? And the reality is these days, those environments are as complex or more complex than anything you can build on premise, just given the number of services they have to offer and the complexity they have to offer. So, with regard to testing, right, and automation, picking the most important things, the data that you're protecting these days is very complex, and picking some subset of those through data classification and picking the things that you are going to test and test the restoration of is one of those things that's really critical, because it has to be tested. You can't necessarily rely on it without verification, and that automation process is going to help you do that in a very efficient and cost-effective way.
I'm glad you brought that up, Sean, because not only there's the applications themselves that are becoming more complex in how they're built, right? Containerization, microservices, how are they backed up? How are they recovered, et cetera, et cetera. There's the data for those things and where does it live? Plus then there's scale, right? I mean, the more history goes on, the larger data sets get. And at some point, the human capability to be able to kind of protect all these moving parts and do it the right way, right, can't be done without automation, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying before. It's like it quickly reaches the point where it's just not sustainable. It's the old classic problem of, As soon as your backup window gets to be 24 hours and 1 minute, you're kind of screwed. So it's the same thing. You've got to figure out ways to improve your efficiency, streamline the process, make it more repeatable. And automation is really the only practical way to do it.
And IBM,
not to go off the rails too much, but I'm curious as to the opinion of the folks that, today, of you folks. I often ask my colleagues who've been in this business for 25, 30 years, like I think some of us have, or most of us have, right? Do you think things today are more complex than they were 25, 30 years ago, or less complex? And I think for me, the answer comes back that they are more complex.
They're absolutely.
Just the IT infrastructure is just more complex than it has ever been during my career.
Without a doubt.
And I think that's why you need that automation, is to hide a lot of that complexity so that you can get people of different skill sets coming in and functioning and being value add.
I think the pace of innovation, I think the tools that we have, so I definitely would agree that it's more complex, Sean, right? But I think that the tools used to solve a lot of the data management challenges, we also have gotten smarter and more sophisticated. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't change the fact that the speed of the complexity that starts to enter into your environment isn't more and more rapid, meaning I'm continuously trying to get ahead of it. Whereas maybe before it wasn't like that, right? Which is a big reason why, and Tricia, you mentioned Christy, why IBM's platform in the data resilience space is an open ecosystem, right? Because you want the best of everything that you can possibly have. And no one vendor, I don't care who it is, you can't convince me otherwise, that someone else has everything that you possibly could ever want and is building the next greatest thing, right? But by partnering with folks who focus on specific areas like Predator and Cobalt Iron, that focus on automation and orchestration and looking at your backups afterwards and that sort of thing, we can partner with the Christie, and we can partner with those folks to help us provide an integrated way for clients to simply and seamlessly kind of try as hard as they can to stay ahead of the curve. And I would then suggest, right, Randy, if other people are helping in this realm and have that expertise, we every week we take a spin on the wheel of misfortune. I have to believe, right, that the hackers are getting just as sophisticated as we are, or as underlying tech is.
Sure. So
what's out there to kind of help us in that realm, right?
So great question. And the short answer is, in order to stay one step ahead of the bad guys, you've got to be able to sort of, number one, think like they do. And number two, you've got to anticipate and try to stay sort of one move ahead of them. So one of the ways that can be done is using a framework called, cleverly enough, SOAR, security automation and orchestration, or security orchestration and automation. And IBM has a framework of solutions around security operations in their SOC, which is actually pretty cool and does a really good job, I think, of documenting what the various elements of this model are. And it's a pretty logical, we talked earlier about how automation seems like a pretty natural evolution as you get more complex and there's more workloads that you've got to manage. The ability to automate these processes, orchestrate them, not just on the backup and recovery side, which we spend a lot of time talking about, but even on the front end. So for attack prevention and vulnerability prevention, and pattern recognition and other things we talked about sort of earlier on in some of the previous steps in this whole life cycle. This whole orchestration automation platform is designed to automatically build playbooks and automation methodologies and policies that can learn from previous attacks, for example, and harden the environment by making minor configuration changes and adjusting the environment in a way that reduces the vulnerability, reduces kind of the attack surface area. So it's all becoming more and more tightly integrated. And we talk a lot about how, backup recovery and rapid recovery and intelligent recovery in the event of a failure or an attack is becoming more and more tightly integrated with the front end of the process, which is the sort of detection and prevention side. So, we work very closely with our teammates on the security side. We're doing more integrations, and we'll have more things to talk about and introduce in the future. But it's a really good example of where the NIST framework is being really deployed and instrumented through its entirety. And we, IBM, are working very closely to deliver solutions to the marketplace that really attack these big problem domains. So these are, big, complicated, thorny issues that are only going to get worse. So, the ability to kind of stay out in front of it and stay ahead of it using things like SOAR and using advanced AI and machine learning, which, not coincidentally is another area where IBM is very heavily invested and where we've had this domain expertise and thought leadership for, decades, right? So I think we're able, as a result of those things, to put together a very robust narrative around how we provide this level of security. And I think we as a storage brand are clipping into that and plugging into that framework as aggressively as we can. And I think we're seeing the outcomes of that in the field, in the market.
I think it's kind of funny, Randy, as you were talking, I started thinking about what we were talking about before as far as the sophistication and complexity. And as an aside, my favorite comedian is Dennis Miller, right? And he has this joke where he talks about a photographer for the National Enquirer. And he says, is that the lowest possible rung on the photojournalistic ladder? And I think that when it comes to IT, the lowest rung on that IT ladder was backup, right? For the longest time, the backup admin, right? You come in, you have one job, it's kind of repetitive. And I think over the last few years, right, we've seen folks kind of treat that as backup solutions are getting so simple. Any storage admin can do it. I have a million other things to do. I'll also do this. But this is becoming a job. I was just on a call with a business partner, and they were talking about all the different ways I can use safeguarded copy to capture snaps really quick. But what happens if it's 200 days old and it's on tape? Why do I need this? And I keep thinking about you now have to start paying attention, right? You got to pay. What's the best economical deployment of what you're trying to achieve to protect your information and not, have data sprawl out of control and be in multiple different places and know how to get things back and do all that. I mean, it's getting sophisticated, and the tools like you just pointed out, right, to be able to kind of quickly identify and know what's going on can only help in that matter.
Yeah, for sure. And the volume of work that these people are confronted with, and you make a good point. I think you guys have been in this market space long enough to have seen the evolution of the sort of lowly backup administrator sitting next to the system admin in the data center, back in the corner, and now security and vulnerability prevention and all that is becoming a strategic imperative. It's no longer just kind of a necessary, or it's no longer just a necessary side effect of running an IT shop. It's becoming a strategic advantage. I mean, if you're in financial services and you are the most resilient, best backed up, fastest recovery, example of your particular entity in that industry, you have a competitive advantage. So it's really changed, I think.
Sean, Tricia, any final words? Oh, Sean's switching to his headset.
Sean's getting serious now.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I was going to say, Steve, I think the companies that treated their backup like you just described are likely to end up in the Wall Street Journal these days with a story about the either the breach that happened and it took them 2 months to recover, or them going out of business because they never did recover after the breach, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think that attitude is quickly falling by the wayside because of current events. And
I would agree.
Yep. I mean, it's the same thing with, I don't know, you use auto mechanics as an analogy, right? I mean, engines used to require getting in there and tearing them apart and rebuilding them, and people with specific expertise on a specific type of car or a specific engine design, became they became sort of not as differentiated, right? Everybody works on small block Chevys, great. There's 10 million people who can do that. Well, now, cars are four-wheel supercomputers, right? So you've got technicians now who are very sophisticated. They're very well trained. They are very advanced in terms of the tooling and instrumentation they use to diagnose problems. We're hurtling, and you look at Tesla as an example. I think we're hurtling towards a future of open source cars, which is terrifying, but it's going to happen. It's already happening. There's already people who are developing, crowdsourced operating systems for vehicle automation. So, it's a brave new world.
It's an interesting analogy because, you can kind of make the argument that the auto mechanics tools are getting very much more sophisticated, just like the IT tools that we discussed.
Yep.
But the skills required to operate them and the good mechanics are getting harder and harder to find, or they're at least as hard to find as they used to be, right?
Yeah.
And they're more valued because of it.
Yep.
So it's interesting.
And
certainly they don't fix themselves. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Yeah, anybody who's driven a self-driving Tesla knows that you better still have your hands on the wheels and be paying attention.
Right. We're not quite to the fully automated stage yet. True.
Yeah, that's the last thing you want to be open source, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Team, I want to thank you all very, very much in the conclusion of this episode of the 6 key things that you need for a truly resilient environment. Next week, we're going to put these into practice. We're going to have Pete Bray from Red Hat come in and talk to us about the stack on top of this service called data protection and other data services that Red Hat provides and how they can help complement this entire data resilient environment. So I welcome you all. I thank you all for today, and stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.